Hi, Joe Alton, MD here, also known as Dr. Bones of the survival website doomandbloom.net, co-author of the Book Excellence Award-winning 4th edition of the Survival Medicine Handbook, and designer of quality medical kits at store.doomandbloom.net. I'm often asked to teach suture classes around the country, and it's a skill that would be helpful for the family medic in survival settings. There are many ways to skin a cat though, or suture a pig's foot. I mostly teach people how to perform individual stitches, also known as interrupted sutures, mostly because each stitch is its own unit, and a poor job done by an amateur on one stitch might not necessarily disrupt an entire wound closure. Saving suture material is important, and in some situations, so is saving time. Once you become proficient in placing interrupted sutures to close a laceration and feel you can depend on the integrity of those sutures, you might move on to a faster way to close a wound. That's what's called a continuous closure. In a continuous closure, there's one set of knots at the place where you anchor the suture and another set of knots where you finish. And this is often easier to perform and certainly faster than a series of single stitches. But be aware that your entire closure depends on those two sets of knots being solidly placed. If one set gets loose or falls apart, the entire closure unravels and you're left once again with an open wound that could easily become infected. Let's go over a typical laceration closure using the continuous method, sometimes called a baseball stitch because it looks a little bit like the seam on a baseball. Here we'll use a pig's foot as a template, but there are various synthetic templates that you can also use to practice on. I use pig's feet because of the similarity to human skin. Okay, we'll begin at one end. Now I usually do this horizontally, but for the camera angle it's better this way. You can choose whatever side makes sense to you, left for left-handers, right for right-handers, but whatever you like. We're using silk suture here, but other non-absorbable sutures like Prolene or nylon would be fine for skin. You can find a discussion, by the way, on suture types in our Survival Medicine Handbook at doomandbloom.net. Okay, let's begin. Okay, we're going to start with an instrument tie like the type I teach in other videos that you'll find on this channel. Enter the skin with the needle at a 90-degree angle and leave a small length of string at the end so that you can do your instrument tie loops. Now I recommend at least 4 knots, one on top of each other, with the first one being a surgeon's knot, where you use 2 loops, as you see here, on the instrument instead of just one. Then you cross the suture over. This will tend to make it lie flat and stay in place without adding pressure. You can pull the suture, by the way, to the other side to anchor it better, but I only do that with gaping wounds, which this is not. When finished with this anchoring stitch, you're going to go ahead and you're going to cut the short end to about 1/4 inch. Now you'll notice I put a number of dots on each side so you get an idea of spacing and how much to take. You want to take consistent bites on each side. Then, of course, you're going to reload your needle as you normally do. I'm going to use the dots, as I said, for sort of a little guide here for you. Now, we want a solid closure, but we want to approximate, not strangulate, the tissue. If you place the stitch too tight, it could break down the skin that's enclosed by the knots to the point that healing is less than optimal. So you want to take consistent bites on each side. I'd say less than 1/4 inch on each side would be good, and you want to have a similar distance between your suture throws. Now, the more likely that there'll be stress on the closure, say, I don't know, over a joint like the knee or the elbow, the closer the throws should be together and the thicker your suture should be. This is 2/0 suture, pretty thick suture for certainly a skin closure, but it's something that is easy to learn with. So if you haven't been doing this type of closure, well, this might be a good practice thing, especially with tough skin like a pig's foot. A pig's foot is like human skin, but it's not alive human skin, so it's tougher. Now, I just realized that I've only done the basic classes since the pandemic started. So being the old retired surgeon that I am, I haven't really needed to do one of these continuous closures since 2019. I only teach interrupted sutures to first-timers, as one poorly performed stitch breaking down won't undo the closure. Here, it will. So if you mess up on the first suture knot or the second or the last suture knot, well, then you could find yourself in some kind of trouble. By the way, you can conserve your sutures with a laceration like this one, where the skin is close together, by combining sutures with steri strips or butterfly closures, or just with steri strips at all. You can save the sutures for the more gaping wounds. That's what I would do. And we would use the rule of halves, which is something that I've talked about before, or a number of times. Now here we're going to do the last suture throw, and that suture throw is going to leave us with a loop. Instead of a short end and a long end, it'll leave us with a short loop and a long end of string. And so what we're going to do is do our surgeon's knot again, except we're doing our two ties, or two loops rather, and then grabbing the end of the short loop, cross it, so we'll have a nice flat surgeon's knot, and then we'll do our additional single loops. By the way, it's important to make sure that the skin edges don't invert into each other. This leaves the skin edge under the closure. That could lead to poor healing, a higher chance of infection, and the formation of what are known as inclusion cysts. These usually occur as a result of taking too much on one side and too little on the other. So here you see the completed end knot, group of knots, and I cut it to about, I guess, 1/4 inch. And there you have it. Well, there you have it. Another way to skin the cat or suture the pig. We'll show you additional new techniques in future videos. Remember that it's not just knowing how to throw a stitch that's important, but having the judgment as to when a wound should be closed or possibly left open and allowed to heal in over time. You'll find all this information and more in our book, The Survival Medicine Handbook, the essential guide for when help is not on the way. This is Joe Alton, MD, that old Dr. Bones, wishing you the best of health in good times or bad. Thanks for watching. Hey, make sure to get your family medically prepared with quality kits and individual supplies, including suture materials, from our entire line at store.doomandbloom.net. You'll be glad you did.